Well, hello, folks. Welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host, and I look forward to bringing you Sean Manseau today. But first, I want to get to a couple of updates. First thing is, if you have not gone to Dr. John W. Price, drjohnwprice.com, check that out when you can and sign up for the newsletter. It's one of the ways I'll be keeping in touch with the community. I look forward to many exchanges, and the newsletter starts. By the time this comes out, it will have already started. So check it out. You will get a welcome letter and be brought into the community, which will have many opportunities for enrichment, connection, depth, and expansion. So I first want to let you know that by the time you hear this, I think it's around the time that my interview with Rich Roll will be coming out. Go check out his podcast. It's great stuff, richroll.com. And I look forward to being on that show. The other offering that we have on the website is the Open Gate. It's a group that will be open through August. In this group, we talk about the Little Teachers, which is one of the chapters that I'm writing in the book. Little Teachers is a way of talking about or reframing what typically, as a psychotherapist, people want to fix, change, stop, ignore. We call them feelings, emotions, these heightened states. Jung called them complexes. But one of the things I want to do is shift them into initiators so that we can engage with our inner life in a way that is dialogical and helps us be shaped and transformed by our experiences as opposed to constricted and reduced by our emotions, and certainly these events and experiences that happen in our inner life that we have not been taught how to engage with. So I'm excited to bring that to you. The group has already started. It is fantastic. Sign up when you can. There will be many more offerings, also a number of other groups that are coming out. Be looking on the website for that. And again, if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get real-time updates on that. I want to always give a tip of the hat to the Center for Healing Arts and Sciences, a boutique integrative clinic that my wife and I started a long time ago. Check us out at the centerforhas.com. And also, as always, check out the Young Center in Houston, younghouston.org. Sean, I want to get to Sean for a second. I've always enjoyed Sean quite a bit. We talk about this book, The Devil You Know, Evolving a Shamanic Psychology of Transcendental Evil by Dr. Shonda Freud. Sean has one of the more captivating imaginations I've ever connected with. Sean is a writer, ritual designer, and creator of Entheogenic Fitness Training, a metamodern spiritual system that blends psychedelic mysticism, physical training, mythic storytelling, and gamified theology. Drawing from depth psychology, post-Gnostic cosmology, and performance-based ritual, Sean's work invites practitioners into a sacred process of transformation through movement, resistance, and ecstatic play, and many other things. His 2-volume, 1,100-page work, The Entheogenic Fitness Training, proposes a new religious architecture for the age of altered states and creative gnosis. And The Devil You Know is really a fascinating, active imagination of various parts of Sean. He set it up really well, and I always enjoy talking to you, Sean. Thank you for your time, and thanks for coming out for The Sacred Speaks. And that is all today, so for now, we'll leave it there. Thanks for being here.
Controls your dreams, persuades your thoughts.
So today we step into a liminal space shaped by imagination, myth, resistance, and song. My guest is Sean William Manseau, a myth maker, ritual architect, and the creator of Entheogenic Fitness Training, a system that defies easy categorization, and so does Sean, of course. Part sacred performance, part psychedelic protocol, part gamified theology. EFT is what happens when mysticism, trauma, physical resistance, and ecstatic play are folded into one living, breathing initiatory path. Sean has done something rare. He's written, this is bold, this is the contours of a religious system, not in theory, but in practice. A mythopoetic system you live in, a spiritual discipline that doesn't begin with belief, but with movement, with voice, and with courage. This isn't a path of escape, it's a path of incarnation. I'm sure, I can imagine, we're going to explore the cosmology behind this system, what it means to design a religion for the metamodern age. We'll confront suffering not as a problem to fix, but as a pressure that forges capacity, and we'll ask, what if your spiritual transformation could be trained like a skill? What if gnosis could be cultivated through strength? Take a breath, shake off what you thought religion had to be or could be, and certainly has been for you, and step with us into this sacred arena of becoming. Let's begin, Sean.
Dr. John Price, that was an excellent introduction. Thank you
Right
so
on.
much for having me on Sacred Speaks.
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure. You and I've been sharing these conversations for a long time, and as we were just saying, we're connecting at a time where Miles and I reconnected recently, and I released an interview with him. Of course, his world is pilgrimage and tantra and Joseph Campbell, and he's very interested in mapping the process. And then Greg Shaw is an interview that's about to come out with theurgy and the soul, or Hellenic tantra, is what he calls his recent book. And it just so happens that here you are in that string of three, that
Amazing.
it really weaves together some important religious context. And I think, Sean, one of the things that I really admire about you and your work is that not only do you have the chops to name it, you also have the strength to push yourself in ways, as certainly what Greg was talking about, that philosophers were not just people that could think a lot; they were practitioners, and it's philosophy's been extracted from the world of practice. I think I'm sure in the underbelly of philosophy departments there are many practitioners, but they've got to hide that. The academy doesn't actually.
Right.
The academy doesn't like it when you're a practitioner.
Yeah, they got to think about their career, right, and their academic standing.
Yeah. So, I want to dive in with this, and certainly we have a lot of threads to pull on. But just opening things up, when did you first realize the sacred, psychedelic, and performative might belong together? I know we did this in our first interview, but I want to frame this for folks that are just stumbling in.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the summer of 2017. I had been for the previous year, I had been working with an ayahuasca group outside of Seattle, Washington, and at a certain point, and for those of you who don't know, when you drink ayahuasca, you enter what they call shamanic, or I call shamanic reality, where the plants have an intelligence and they speak to you. And oftentimes people will say, ayahuasca told me this, or Mother Ayahuasca told me that. And so I had a ceremony where Aya told me that I was a priest from a long line of priests, which is true. My dad is a married Roman Catholic priest. And that basically, if we were Hindus, we'd be Brahmins, right? If there was a priest gene, I had it, and I needed to find a way to put that put that to work. And so at first I thought possibly that meant trying to become an ayahuasquero. But then there was a month where at that point I was assisting with the ceremonies, which just basically meant I would, accept payment from people and help them to the bathroom when they were too, Mariato, to get up and go there by themselves and blow smoke on people when they were purging. But there was this one month I couldn't go because I was traveling for business. And so I decided to stay at home and do my own little ad hoc ceremony instead with my own music. And initially I used a playlist that kind of followed what Maps recommends, a lot of instrumental stuff, nothing with lyrics. There's like a strong directive to avoid songs with words because they don't want to impose, in a therapeutic setting, they don't want to impose emotional experiences on people. But about halfway through the ceremony, I got kind of bored with that. And so I put on one of my favorite records of all time, which is by an indie folk band called Neutral Milk Hotel from Athens, Georgia. They had this record called In the Airplane Over the Sea, which the singer-songwriter Jeff Mangum kind of wrote as a response to reading Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank's book, as an adult. He had a little bit of a breakdown over it. And so he wrote this concept album effectively about trying to invent a time machine to go back and save her. So I put these songs on. It was a wonderful, warm experience until about halfway through the record, when a song called "O Comely" started playing. And "O Comely" is this sort of magical realist dirge about the fate that Anne suffered. And while I was listening to it, I started to get these images of the camps. I saw barbed wire and chimneys and windowless brick buildings. And as I was listening, I started to get these rushes of energy through my body. It almost felt like, at a certain point, like I was being like electrocuted. It really felt like a current was passing through me. And something told me to I kind of bunched my fists up like I was holding on to it. And I just kept holding it and holding it and holding it. And then when the song hit this climax, I took a big breath and ritually blew across my palm, and then repeated that gesture with the other hand. And it was like I had somehow absorbed all this shame and sorrow and horror and transmuted it, and then released it out into that transmuted energy out into the world as a blessing. And when it was over, I just kind of collapsed back like, what the hell is that? And I also had a very clear sense that the mushrooms themselves were like, what was that? Do that again. And so I did. And I started experimenting, and I realized for the first time that I could get all these different aesthetic effects from listening to different kinds of recorded music. And, this is something that people have known forever with, they'll get high and listen to the Dark Side of the Moon and stuff like that. But I sensed there was something deeper there. And so I started pushing it. And then when I incorporated sigil magic into it, things got really strange. And I basically had a prophetic activation, for lack of a better term. And I had this lucid dreaming vision. My eyes were closed, but I could see as clearly as if I was there with my eyes open. And I saw the kind of ceremonies that I was doing being performed as theater, with costumes and lights and everything, and people being present like on a dance floor, and everybody doing the work together. It was going to be a kind of almost like a group fitness class, except it was magic. And the point of it would be to make an energetic connection to the archetype behind whatever song, the target emotion, whatever song we were working with. And it just kept getting, that summer I did it almost every week, and my doses went up and up and up and up, well past any kind of point of reason. But what I was getting, the results I was getting were just fantastic. And by the end of that summer, I had a complete ritual playlist that I realized could be performed as theater. And I went and I rented a rehearsal studio in Seattle, and built it out as a sort of kind of theater, and started inviting people down. And that's really where it started. That initial ritual became something called the First Church of David Bowie Shamanic Cabaret, which later expanded into something called the First Church of Syzygy Stardust Shamanic Cabaret. And then I wrote a bunch of these other, three other entheotrainments, I call them, which is basically a three-way portmanteau of entheo, God within, training, and entertainment, entheotrainments, which is a kind of participatory theater that you engage in order to experience gnosis, based on the idea that anything you can do by yourself can be made more fun and more intense by doing it with other people. Whether that's going to see comedy or live music or climbing El Capitan or having sex or eating street tacos, it's always more fun with other people. And the same can be true, I realized, of having mystical experiences. It just requires structure and it requires discipline, because if you're going to do this kind of thing with other people, you need to be able to have the self-control to ensure that should you start having difficulties, it doesn't become somebody else's problem. And out of that grew what I called the Phonomantic method. So I used to be a strength and conditioning coach. And so the Phonomantic method was the application of the principles of strength and conditioning to the psychedelic space. And what that yielded was an approach to working with psychedelics that wasn't therapeutic, it was augmentative. And the analogy to be made is so the therapeutic use of psychedelics, where you bring somebody into an office and you put them on the couch and they've got an eye shade on and they're listening to Bach, and there's somebody there to hold their hand if they get nervous. That's like what a physical therapist does, right? Where they take somebody who's injured, and then using gentle restorative exercise, you can bring them back to a place of normal functioning. But as a strength and conditioning coach, what I would do was inflict carefully titrated doses of stress on consenting subjects in order to elicit a positive adaptive response, right? You make people stronger. And it turns out you can do exactly the same thing with psychedelics with the right set and setting, but then you incorporate what I call the phonomantic triad of structure, stress, and skill. And so within that, there are multiple stressors that you can work with. And part of that is also, based on what the person who's participating wants to do. So once I had all that, then I realized I needed a way to package that for mass consumption. And that basically, because it felt like religion, but everybody I would explain this to, a lot of people would bristle at the idea of church or the word religion. And I realized I need to reclaim this word, because spirituality wasn't quite enough. Because to me, spirituality is about your relationship with the source of your being, however you understand it. But what religion can be and should be is the way that you gather with other people to have experiences of that source that's stronger than you could manage by yourself. And so I had to come up with basically a new way to religion. And what that became was eventually what I called the para-reality game, which is a para-reality game is a complete out-of-the-box set of concepts, beliefs, and practices that enable and condition experiences of the sacred while simultaneously generating community, right? So it's religion, except that that it's all made up. And but it's as real as you want it to be. And at a certain point, things start happening that will make a believer out of you. So all that took about 7 years. And and
This
and
scares
while I
the
was
shit out of some people, man.
You
This
better
is
believe it, dude.
yeah.
Especially when I get to when I get to the next part, which is why we were originally having this conversation. This development did not go unopposed. I ran into some very, very, very serious problems along the way, and basically independently verified the existence of a malevolent force in transpersonal consciousness that opposes this sort of thing. It opposes human development in general. And at first, I called it resistance, and now I just call it the adversary.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the genesis of this book, which is it's not showing up.
Hold it back. Good.
Well,
Yeah.
it's blurring out, but that's okay. It's called The Devil You Know.
Yes. I'll hold it up. I have it. I have like 3 copies right there, by the way.
The 3 copies. I know. I'm so sorry. That's the blessing and the curse of the self-publishing model is like, you do it all by yourself, but then you keep finding things you need to fix.
Yeah, sure.
But eventually, after like literally 70 uploads, it's finally done. And so there you go. And so that's the long and short of what brought us here. And then in the year and a half since then, I wrote my new book, which is, again, you can see it like this. This is all one book because it's too long to publish as one volume.
Got it.
This is the 1,100 pages of Entheogenic Fitness Training, volumes 1 and 2. And what I did was, this is a little bit of backstory that I didn't get to. So I used to be a strength and conditioning coach. I owned a couple of gyms, but in a lifetime before that, I was an animator in the video game industry. And at a certain point, I developed a method for teaching exercise based on the principles of animation. And it was this book, By the Numbers, which is this huge telephone-size book that explains this very, very careful method of teaching exercise with the goal of inculcating virtuosity in your clients. And so what entheogenic fitness training is by the numbers for psychedelics, and specifically for this sort of entheogenic form of shamanism based in popular culture that I have developed.
Well, and of course to include that you and I initially met around your book, AP Psychedelics.
Right.
And so just to add that to, so, okay, I'm glad you brought, because I want to go into The Devil You Know in a kind of roundabout way. But at first I want to talk about maybe integrating all these dimensions, in particular, framing this practice as a game. And what happens psychologically or spiritually when we engage transformation through structured play and through community engagement and game theory or whatever you want to talk about. Go there.
All right. Well, let's start with the basic question: how can Buddhism and Christianity both be true?
Amen.
Because they can't. If you can, for all the goodwill ecumenicism aside, they offer opposite and opposing ideas of what is real. Right.
That's right.
I won't belabor it, but if you know, you know.
You do.
Right. And yet at the same time, they both work, and that they both created thousands of people of superior spiritual attainment, right? Whether they're arhants or saints. And so what I ended up concluding was that every religion is based on a set of sacred stories, and there's no real evidence for the truth of any of them. Right? They were all written down decades or more after the supposed fact by people who weren't even there to witness the events that they claim to describe. And yet somehow by treating them as true, people are able to, they improve their lives. Right? And so that led me to the conclusion that God is real, but religion is make-believe that can yield transformative results. And once I had that realization, I realized that I was free to make up a new game of make-believe. and that's exactly what I did. Because I had produced so much visionary material over the course of those 7 years that all I had to do was start putting it into a coherent narrative that created a paracosm, a sort of imaginary world. And then that became all I needed. And then that began to actually condition my experiences, that coherent narrative that I was living in. And that continues to be a source of absolute wonder to me. Because now at this point, so I have left off doing the psilocybin-based ceremonies because I'm back in Massachusetts, and it's not legal here for one thing. But I have found that I can use high doses of THC and do exactly the same thing, and I can actually observe in myself the phenomenological shift between trying to believe and then actually knowing. There's this shift that you go to, and the best way I can describe it, so I am a tried and true believer. You know what I mean? I believe in God and the goddess. I'm a goddess worshiper, frankly, but I understand that there absolutely is an ultimate reality that confronts humanity and always has, right? But at the same time, there's still a shred of doubt about it. You know what I mean? Like even for everything that I've been through, this still kind of like, can this really be real? However, there is a way to know God that is like, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're thirsty and you don't want to disturb your partner, so you get up and it's pitch black and you walk across your bedroom and down the hall,
Dodging the floorboards.
The floor is going to be there. You don't even think about it. It just is, right?
Yeah.
That there's a way to, there's a space, a headspace that you can get into where God is real, just like that. It's it's so obvious. It's the obvious condition of existence. And that is a deeply desirable place to be. And of course, and ends up being the point so I call that gnosis, right? In the traditional sense of a direct and immediate knowledge of the divine. And so you experience that in ceremony, and then the task becomes getting there more and more often in everyday life, despite the fact that there is a force in your consciousness that does not want you to come to that full realization.
So you said something earlier, and we left off there a second ago, so I'll pick that thread up. But before, you said make believe, and I wanted to almost offer the flip that you're offering, which we have in our framework that make believe is fake,
right?
And so I do want to touch on that point a little bit and get you to articulate something in that, because I would probably imagine that your idea of make believe is make believe on one level of consciousness, but also a necessary structure on a different layer of consciousness. Fair?
Fair enough. So the definition of make believe is agreeing to act as if a certain set of conditions pertain. Let's pretend this, right? And that can happen on a conscious or unconscious level. Little kids do it spontaneously. And I'm not the only. What I discovered in the course of doing the research for The Devil You Know is that there's an anthropologist named Tanya Lerman who's done extensive work.
I was just about to talk to her. Yeah. I was going to reference her.
She's done extensive work in this, right?
Yes.
And she basically says that when you establish a paracosm, right, a game, a world of make believe, but you treat it as true with the expectation that you'll have experiences there, it becomes a faith frame, and that's where people operate in. That is what religion is people operating in faith frames, whether or not they understand that that's what is happening. And so it no longer becomes this thing. It simply becomes like a way to buy in. There's a funny line I can't remember the Latin right off the top of my head, but it's in the new book, but it says, I pretend to believe until I know because it's fun and it works. And that's how you do it, right? But then, so you begin, and there's oftentimes in ceremony where you are trying to feel a certain way and you can't. So you just make believe you are. And then eventually you'll get past whatever resistance is standing between you and where you want to be, and you'll get there. Make believe becomes this fail-safe position. But when make believe, eventually, if you do it hard enough, starts to become make belief. That's when you're using your imagination to actually constitute your reality. And then from there, make belief then becomes belief, and then belief becomes knowledge.
And what would you say about magic here?
That is magic. So I define magic as an eruption into the everyday of a capital M mystery that is eternal. It's a felt experience. You know when it's happening, and it's often encountered by an actual physical sensation, a frisson, like you get goosebumps. You know what I mean? You're like, whoa, what is this? Right? And so that's what you're on your way to doing, but it's created by it, or at least the scene is set for it by one of my favorite things that I've come up with, which is tertiary process thinking. Right. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Freud had said there were two forms of cognition. There was primary process thinking, or what it used to be disparagingly known as magical thinking, which is like what they categorize as an infantile way of thinking that wishing could change things. Like just by thinking something, it's going to have an impact in the outer world. Right. And then he said that a mature ego has secondary process thinking, where you know that nothing happens without work. Tertiary process thinking is when events mean whatever you want them to mean. And the classic example that I give, the way that in Entheogenic Fitness Training, one of the exercises I give to develop this is I say, go to your local Safeway and stand in front of the entranceway, right? And then I want you to do two things. You're going to wave your hand like a Jedi, and then you're going to step onto the pressure pad. And I want you to make believe that it was your waving of the hand that made the door open, and feel a causal connection between that gesture you did and then the result. And that's tertiary process thinking. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is after the fact. It happened, right? And causally, there's no real connection between what you did. If you really thought that, that would be magical thinking, right? And then a secondary process thinking, you know that it's putting your foot down on the pad is what's made the door open.
Mm-hmm.
But in tertiary process thinking, it was indeed your Jedi hand wave that opened the door. And that conditions you to experience magic. And the thing is, when you're in an altered state of consciousness, that becomes a skill. Right? That becomes a way to inculcate certain kinds of experiences, and then it takes over. And then you're not wishing it that way at all. You're actually experiencing it. You've left the mundane behind and entered what I call belief space. And that's where you want to be. That's the shamanic reality where ayahuasqueros operate, right? When everything that goes into an ayahuasca experience, where you walk into the maloca, you know what I mean? And they do all they bless the medicine, and they call you up one at a time, and then you drink the medicine, and then the lights go out and everything. It's all to create this certain like expectation of this thing that's going to happen. And that very definitely conditions the experience of, and them singing the Icaros and everything that goes along with it. Be very different to do what some ill-informed people do, which is drink ayahuasca and then go to a rave or something like that, right? They'll still trip, but they're not going to have the ayahuasca experience. They'll have they'll have a lot of visuals because it's DMT, but that's not at all the same thing. You will not access you will access shamanic aspects of reality, but you will not be in shamanic reality. It's not the same thing, because the basic thing is, like, when you alter your state of consciousness, you make yourself porous to all the predators and parasites that are out there. Everything, you know what I mean? The divine mind is an ocean of consciousness. It's a complete psychic ecology, flora and fauna, and some of those things want to eat you. Some of them are beneficial, right? But some of those things are not. And that's kind of one of the points that I make in The Devil You Know, is that might suggest, given the work and the observations I've made of these things at work, like, it might actually suggest a new etiology for mental illness, or at least something to be considered.
Yeah. So before we jump into that, I want to circle up on two things. The first is, I think it's so radical you mentioned Tanya Luhrmann. And so Tanya, the one thing that I wanted to bring into our conversation is a point that she made in an interview that I did with her years ago. She says that she lived with evangelical Christians in Michigan. Mm-hmm. And her book is When God Talks Back. And for the listener, she is a Stanford professor of psychological anthropology, and has definitely check her out. She's outstanding. She says, well, number one, she says that there are qualitative differences in the, quote, voice of the hallucination in an individualistic versus a collectivist culture. So what she'll say is that in a collectivist culture, the voice of the hallucination is typically a relative asking for support or to provide support. In an individualistic culture, the voice is typically a menacing voice, which is asking for harm to self or others. Radical. Like, that's how I stumbled into her in the first place. So she ended up living with evangelical Christians who make God a cup of tea. And they sit down with God in the morning and drink the tea. And if you ask any of these Christians, is God sitting right there? They go, well, no, there's not somebody there, but I'm on some level acting as if. Mm-hmm. So it maps very well onto what you're talking about. And also, she says, and I got to say, I live with this community of people, of evangelicals, and weird shit happened. Yeah. Like, she saw weird things happen. And she also did her dissertation at Oxford on witches. So she lived with a coven of witches for 2 years and said, weird shit happens. Yeah. So it really does support what you're talking about here. And I love that you referenced Tanya, because it's right in the wheelhouse of what you're creating. And that's great. Yeah, 100%. And it's so interesting that the quality of the experience has changed depending on the setting and the story that they were telling about what they are doing, and you can make start to conjecture in really interesting ways about this idea. And this is one of the things I talk about in the new book, is like, when you talk to your soul, you are effectively creating an imaginal structure that becomes an autonomous complex in your consciousness that spirit can communicate to you through. Right. And when you're doing that, when you're acting as if by making God a cup of tea, that's exactly what you're doing. You are making it real. It is real, but it needs an inroad into your consciousness. Yes. And treating it as it's real makes it more and more and more real.
in a fascinating way, you get exactly what you ask for.
So the second thing I wanted to go back to when you were talking about magic is this is one of the anxieties underneath what we're talking about. So Mark Plotkin, another fella that I interviewed, he's an ethnobotanist and has worked a lot in ayahuasca traditions down in South America. And one of the things he said is there's no difference in the spells between dark magic and light magic. He said there's that's the thing we've always confused, is that it has nothing to do with reading a different spell book, so to speak. It has to do, I think, and I want to see what you would say here, with essentially your intention, your
Yeah.
root, right? To go there for
Yeah.
a second. What?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's at the heart of the theology that Phonomancer, which is my power reality game, explains, which basically imagines the divine as an entelechy of numinous emotion, right? Like they say that the mystics always say that God is this white light that is love. And my conjecture, my experience is that just the way that you can hold up a prism to the light of the sun and refract all the visible frequencies of light, that all emotions are in God.
Yeah.
God is actually beyond love. And I say Pache, John the Apostle on this score. God is glory, or as we like to characterize her experience throughout eternity, the eternal fuck yeah. And so what that means is that any emotion that you can experience, and if you experience it with enough intensity, it becomes numinous.
Yeah.
It becomes a kind of, you're literally receiving a frequency of God. And if you want to think mythopoetically, you are being possessed by a god or goddess. And so one of the things that I have learned how to do in the course of this work, and one of the things that's so challenging and so fucking amazing about all this, excuse my French,
Go.
is that so in the context of a Phonomantic rite, like the first church of Syzygy starred, actually the Phonomantic rite version would be the first church of David Bowie's Shamanic Cabaret. You go through a sequence of emotions that follow the stages of the hero's journey. And when you go into the descent into the cave and the ordeal, those emotions are very dark, and you get to know those emotions very well. For instance, in the ordeal stage of the stereo myth, which is the sort of the first liturgy, the rite of transformation, you effectively seek to embody the devil, rage, pure rage, satanic rage, and you do that by imagining yourself as in the mythos of Phonomancer, the devil is an aspect of God that is self-exiled to serve as to provide the conflict necessary for the story that she wants to tell, right? There is, and that's where it comes from. And so I had this vision of a boy, like a little boy, like a 12 or 13-year-old boy waking up alone in the dark and like not in his bedroom. And he feels like he's pitch black, but he can feel stone under his hands. And he's like reaching around and he can't find his bed and he can't find his desk. And he starts screaming for his mom and dad to come get him, but nobody does. And he sits there terrified, wailing and crying for millennia, eons, millions, billions of years. But gradually he realizes that he can see in his mind's eye his siblings who were back home playing this game that they had all been playing, the last thing he knew. And he realizes that they threw him out of the family, or at least that's what he thinks, right? And that all of his terror, this heartbroken panic and terror becomes rage, homicidal rage. And all he wants to do is destroy everything that they are doing. And that is the archetypal source of resistance. That is the shadow of God. And so there's this part of the ritual where you actually try to bring that out in yourself. And you do that by embodying fuck you, right? As strongly as you can within this ritual container. And so you draw all that energy up. And at the end, so the magic is at the end, you've retained the cogitative organization, that you flip it over and you reject that. And because the resistance is a no to the divine plan. And you say yes, right? With a big Y heavy metal sign, we say fuck yeah to the true will and the divine plan that the goddess has for humanity. But that is a very important thing to be able to access. That's an incredible source of energy, and it's an incredible thing to be able to transmute. And in a very real sense, it is absolutely necessary for full individuation. You have to be conversant with those energies because those are part of you. And so that is, if I know that's a little bit long-winded, but that is my answer to you, is like, that is what you are calling up, is that kind of energy felt at with numinous intensity, and then focus through the lens of your imagination on whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, which I would assume to be trying to hurt somebody else or something like that. And that's brujeria, right? That's black magic.
I'm glad you got there. Yeah. So, okay, then that feels tended to, and now we can jump into the devil you know a bit more and resistance. And so, certainly getting into, I love what you said earlier about psychic ecology, fauna and flora, you know, all
Yeah.
kinds of invisible to our human sensory apparatus. Yeah, go to the, so what'd you discover through writing this book? That's always the, like, because I think the act of writing a book is a magic process in and of itself.
And actually, so make a note of, we're going to talk about resistance and shaitana in a second, but there's something
Good.
I want to explain. I want to talk over with you first, just so we're on the same page about this, which is what this book actually is, right? One of the things that I would do in these ceremonies is I would videotape. I would video myself with my phone, and then I would transcribe, I would narrate in real time what I was going through on these huge, what I call super heroic doses. So I'm talking in between 5 and 10 grams of psilocybe cubensis or psilocybe azurescens, turbo boosted with harmaline, which is a chemical that you can extract from Syrian rue seeds, plus multiple hits of THC off of pre-rolled joints, plus occasionally vape TMT, plus tobacco hape. Like, I put myself into extremely, extremely altered states of consciousness. Yet at the same time, the work was to try to retain a level of like lucidity that was basically close to sobriety. And one of the ways that I would do that is I would narrate in real time in between songs that I was working with what I had just seen and what had happened. Because oftentimes when you do high doses, you start to feel the medicine come on, and the next thing you know, it's 4.5 hours later and you can't really remember anything that happened. But when you have it all on camera, then you get to go back and transcribe everything that happened. And so I had accumulated hundreds of pages of notes and some really dazzling and coherent visionary material. And I knew that I wanted to write about it, but I was faced with this formal problem of like, how do I write about myself with any kind of objectivity? Especially when I realized that it was basically going to be a kind of an attempt at a Jungian self-analysis.
Like an
right?
active imagination.
Yeah. Or let's cut to the chase. It's basically what Jung did in the Red Book.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I would say it was even what was happening in ancient texts when people would have these dialogues with divinity, or like most of the texts from antiquity were doing this.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That makes sense. So I needed a way to talk about myself objectively, but I was also looking for a way to let myself off the hook because I'm not a trained analyst, and I knew there were going to be gaps in my understanding. So I had this drag character from the First Church of Syzygy Starda Shamanic Cabaret Entheogenic. Her name is Dr. Shonda Freuda.
She's quite likable.
And
Yeah.
she is my ripoff of Hedwig Robinson from Hedwig and the Angry Inch, right? And Shonda Freuda's backstory is that she has a PhD in Western popular culture studies, and she's a Jung Institute dropout. And so I decided that I would have Shonda Freuda write about me as Pod Dammit, who is my sort of like in-game persona. And that's what I did. And so what I ended up writing was this very strange book that, like, my poor dad tried to read it. He could not make heads or tails of it, because it basically, it is a novel in a sense. It starts from Shonda Freuda's first person perspective, and she speaks through the book. She makes comments in first person all the way through. But one of the cool things that it allowed me to do was create some narrative profluence, because not only do I have the plot of what happens to Pod Dammit over the course of the 7 years of that she's analyzing his experience, but she has her own issues and concerns. She's got this terrible loss in her life that she's trying to come to terms with. And over the course of the book, and by meeting Pod Dammit and working with Phonomancer and all that stuff, she does. And that so they both Shonda Freuda and Pod Dammit both have these narrative arcs, which is not something you would expect to find in a Jungian self-analysis, right? But that's how it ended up working.
There are a couple of thoughts that Jung, on occasion, and I don't want to tarnish the temple here, but on occasion would use case studies to analyze himself on some level. Like
Yeah.
this is when you start playing with fact and fiction, and it's all an active imagination. And so there's some real validity to what you're talking about
It's
on
it's
so many
it's
levels.
it's all magic. It's a
Yeah.
hypersigil, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that I was writing this thing that about this experience, but I was writing, so even though I was being utterly honest about everything that happened to me, it was also trying to write it into reality
Yeah.
too. So she says, here's the thesis that inspired this book. By overcoming resistance as he followed divine inspiration to create the Phonomantic method and the para-reality game Phonomancer, it expedited his individuation. This suggests an antithesis along the lines of overindulging in psychedelic drugs, it triggered a paranoid psychosis that completely alienated him from society and may yet result in his self-destruction. In documenting his experiences navigating the Chapel Perilous, I hope to resolve this tension with my synthesis. It has mapped where psychology must go if it is to evolve its understanding and treatment of mental illness. He has also created a survival manual for any brave enough to make their own psychedelic descent into the land of the dead. And so that's what this part 2 of the book is, the story of my catabasis, right? My descent into the underworld, utterly no idea what I was doing. And yet in the analysis after the fact, you could very clearly see that it followed the stages of the hero's journey,
Mm-hmm.
with the ordeal being in 2020 when things got particularly harrowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going out there live without a net, because I wasn't in analysis. I didn't have anybody to like talk to about any of this who could make any sense of it. It was really just me being stubborn and refusing to quit, and so that's the story.
So pause for a moment before we jump into the book, because you've said a couple things I want to be sure to click on. Addiction and psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about these because these are very real consequences of this kind of engagement. I wonder what it is about you that prepares you for this journey. What kind of preparatory work is necessary? I want to do our job of making sure that folks, I mean, there are very real consequences to even like high dose THC to folks getting psychotic, young people, young minds. And part of the problem, I think, one of the issues with our modern time, if you look at the 3 jewels of Buddhism and say, oh yeah, a pathway is really important. Many of us don't have the pathways because we've suffered the burden of imagining that religion is about belief in some kind of daddy in the sky or something.
Right.
And that it leaves you without a kind of training ground for how to be in practice.
Yeah.
So what do you say about addiction and psychosis?
Well, so that's the point of entheogenic fitness training. And so I can come at this from a couple different, I can explain what I think was, so it was my personal experiences in life that were what allowed me to make it through this on my own without any help. But I am doing my damnedest to make sure that nobody else ever has to do that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's by laying down a groundwork of basic skills that people need to acquire and basic training principles that they should follow, which are imported straight from the world of strength and conditioning. The most important of which are minimum effective dose and progressive resistance. You should not jump into the deep end with these things. And I don't think one of the problems with the therapeutic approach that I see right now, or people who claim to be practitioners, and certainly in the ayahuasca space, is like, they're just kind of throwing people into it. Right. And people will get big doses and they don't have any preparation. Whereas if you taught people, here, you're going to start with 1 gram, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing too, is they treat it as this, oh, this is only a thing that's going to happen once in your life, or maybe once a year. But if you were like, okay, you're going to go on a program and you're going to do this every 2 months for the next 3 years, right? And the first time you do it, you're only going to take 1 gram. And the next time you do it, 1.5 grams, and then 2 grams, and then 2.5 grams. And eventually you get to the point where you're like, okay, now you're really in it. You can stop here. And if you want to go further, you can, right? But it's absolutely no different than what happens in a gym. Like if I brought a client into the gym and I taught him how to squat, and then I was like, here, I'm just going to put 315 pounds on this bar. Let's see how you do. You know what I mean? That's malpractice, right? And these things need to be applied. Now, why was I able to do it? Well, there are multiple reasons. One was I had a bachelor's degree in the psychology of religion from way back when, right? I had actually written my honors thesis because I had this LSD trip it was supposed to be recreation with my friends on a Saturday night, and turned into a full blast ontological revelation where I basically experienced the reality of emanationism for myself as a 20-year-old with no grounding, but it's in the notes. It's in my thesis. You know what I mean? Which you can still go to UMass and like pull off the shelf and read. Like that's a thing that actually happened. And then based on that, through my 20s and 30s, I was sort of like in and out of Jungian analysis a couple times, and I was always an avid reader in that area, right? But in addition to that, I'd been a bike messenger. I had been a Muay Thai kickboxer. I had been a CrossFitter. I had done all these things that sort of gave me this level of grit and tenacity and fortitude that directly applied to dealing with the things that I had to deal with, right? Especially doing CrossFit, which, you know, gets a bad rap and for lots of good reasons. But I'm telling you that in terms of just like making you psychologically tougher, it's second only to training for fighting. And in EFT, I actually recommend that you start so EFT is broken into 6 stages. It's basically at one level, it's about becoming a superhero, the shamanic superhero Phonomancer, who has a supreme level of entheogenic fitness. That's his superpower. He's kind of like Batman, right? And so at the first level, fundamentals, you learn how to lift weight. You do a basic barbell strength program, right? And then at the second level, which is research and development, you do MMGPP, which is my spin on CrossFit, multimodal general physical preparedness training, which is where you add an element of intensity to it. And so you have to some of these workouts are really, really, really hard. You have to find inner resources in order to get through them. But those lessons, which learned first in the body, are directly applicable to the mind and the spirit later on. And then after that, if you keep going, you train a combat sport, you do jujitsu, or you do boxing, or you do Muay Thai, something where you actually have to impose your will on a resisting opponent, not just something where you like punch the air, right? And then later on, you do rucking, right? You get used to like carrying 50 or 60 pounds of bricks on your back because it's hard, and you put yourself in that situation. And then the real practice is, it's not even really the physical training. It's like, how can you modify your attitude under that load when you're halfway through and you know that like you really wish you hadn't decided to do this today? You could be a little bitch about it, or you can be like, I'm going to be a lighthearted can-do person in this space, right? And if there are other people around you, you want to be able to encourage them, even though you are physically miserable. And that is, again, part of the training process. That's what allows you to get through this stuff. You eventually the only way to get through it in the long term is you have to make other people your why. You have to have that as a reason. Like you're doing this for everybody's sake, not just your own. And that's what allows you to survive.
Well, thank you. That answers quite well. So it does. So essentially you're saying that because here's my amplification, right? Because our culture doesn't have any real value or understanding of alternate states of consciousness, even the imagination. I don't necessarily mean a substance. I just mean the alternate state of consciousness of dreaming. Because we have no structure and no way to relate to these experiences, we therefore have no preparation and recognition that we can't engage. We can't learn how to engage with it on its terms.
That's
therefore, we are at risk of addiction and psychosis because there's no capacity to prepare and be in right relationship with these experiences.
That is so. Yeah. So addiction, especially with THC, is going to come from overuse, from not treating it as a sacred ceremonial thing that you should not do more than once a week, and then only in a very like carefully prescribed sort of way, right? If you're just using it, when people use it just because they're anxious, because they're bored, or because or whatever, yeah, you are going to get weighed upon. There are the psychic predators and parasites will find their way into your now porous consciousness through that medium, and you will get addicted. In terms of the psychosis, I had a good relationship with my unconscious because I had done tons of dream work and tons of active imagination stuff. So I already had I just had a very strong ego structure. And that's another thing that you would be trying to build up in people like over time, over the course of several years before you get to the things that you will eventually have to deal with in order to reap the full benefits of this stuff. Right. And maybe now is the time that we can begin to talk about the nature of resistance and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, that feels right.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to preface it with?
Well, I just want to, I want to go back into process in the book because you have these intrapsychic figures, which are you and not you, that you've put into relationship with each other through the text. and they have an autonomy. And this is to position this in a very Jungian way. One of the things that Jung and all of the folks that work with this kind of magic say is you turn toward the inner figures, not it's not as if they're real, because they're real. It's like that the idea of what is real comes into question. So we're in a real conflict here because modernity doesn't map very well onto this landscape. So just speaking about your experience and how you came up with this creative process, and then the content is important, of course, because what's happened through the process is you've been able to articulate your theories quite well. But I'm very interested in your experiential process and what you learned through writing it.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing I want to say is I'm speaking from the future, right? I don't care what modernity's attitude towards all this stuff is. In 100 years, we're going to understand, these ideas will have filtered further out into popular consciousness, and people will understand that, as Jung said, psychic events are real events because they have effects. That is 100% true. Right. And it is to anyone's great detriment when they ignore their psychic events. They're simply missing out on this vast aspect of their potential experience. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So initially I thought you were referring to, Dr. Chandra Freud and Pa Dammit, but I can see, let's talk about the,
I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am referring, yeah, totally. That's what I mean. Pa Dammit and Chandra Freud is this kind of dialogical space that you put them in conversation, and you're treating them in a way that provides them autonomy. They speak.
Well, they're real people. They're me. They're, you know what I mean?
That's the point. Yes.
They're characters that I inhabit in real life. Like, I go on stage in, you know what I mean? Like, decked out in knee-high white vinyl go-go boots and a mini dress and a cape and a wig and everything. You know what I mean? I'll send you a picture. It's absolutely hilarious. I mean, it's even more ridiculous because I'm this middle-aged man, you know what I mean? With like a kind of a little bit of a burly build, and there I am in this dress and everything, but it has to be done. And part of it is, I mean, there's a real amazing sort of mythic resonance because in the rites of Dionysus, the priests often dressed as women.
Yes.
Right. And there's also this way where it brings. So I originally started the Chandra Freud character for the second liturgy in the shamanic cabaret, which is a rite of purification called the transcendental disco. So all the songs in the stereo myth, the rite of transformation, are all hard rock and heavy metal. And they're very masculine. So it's this opportunity to train masculine archetypes. But all the songs in the transcendental disco are all like dance pop and soul music. And they all have female vocalists, and they become this opportunity to train female archetypes, or rather the female perspective on certain archetypal situations, like falling in love at first sight or getting your heart broken and all these things. So when I was just alone in my apartment in Seattle, before I brought this out to the world at all, I would imagine myself as a young woman having these experiences. And I often relived certain experiences that I had caused as a man from the perspective of a woman, say, whose feelings I had hurt, right? In that thing. And that was extremely edifying, to say the least, you know what I mean? And so I mentioned earlier that any emotion that you experience with enough intensity becomes numinous and can be understood as a possession by a god, right? There's a song in the transcendental disco called Dancing on My Own by this electro-pop artist named Robin. I think it came out in like 2007 or 2010. And the story in the song is, it's being sung by a woman who's out at a club and she sees her ex out with somebody new, and she's appalled. You know what I mean? She's utterly heartbroken, yet she refuses to leave. It's her club. And so she's just going to stand there and dance on her own. And so the way that you find your way into that space of heartbroken rejection is you sing along with the song, and you put yourself in the headspace, that narrative space that's described by the lyrics. You become that character in that moment. And then what ends up happening is that activates your complexes around romantic rejection and stuff like that. And so the next thing you know, you're just singing along, you're lip syncing, but then all of a sudden you're just like, oh God, like you're feeling like, you know what I mean? Like all the old heartbreak you ever felt comes out, and you just cramp. It's like, I've got video of it. It's hidden on YouTube right now, but I was stupid enough to put this stuff like online to document it because I just thought it was so amazing. And so I basically go into this state of ecstasy, but it's like a negative ecstasy. It's a painful ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so later I came to regard that as a possession by Distressa, who's my bespoke goddess of romantic rejection, right? And so in that moment, I'm possessed by Distressa. And what ended up happening is, so at first it was just utterly just crushing. But over time, I began to be able to cultivate an aesthetic appreciation for what I was feeling at the same time that I was actually feeling it. And then I started to realize that that is actually how God experiences us too, that the goddess has this aesthetic appreciation for our emotions. She finds them beautiful, all of them, even the most painful ones. And the more conscious you can be of them as they are happening, the more beautiful she finds it. And that makes your job to be as conscious of your emotions as possible. And to feel them as intensely as possible, because again, you are actually accessing an aspect of the divine as you do so.
Yeah.
So there's a writer named Stephen Pressfield. Have you ever read The War of Art?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Love it.
So if you guys at home have not read this book, it's short. You should go
Short
get
and
it.
sweet.
It's
right.
amazing. It's a writer named Stephen Pressfield who wrote a book about some like fire. I know that he wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance, but he had another one about the Spartans at Thermopylae or whatever that pass was, like at the gates of fire or something like that. Anyway, he writes this book for blocked creatives in which he says that he claims that there is a force in human consciousness that opposes creativity, and he calls it resistance. And he says that it's what stands between you and writing that book you say you always want to write, or starting that diet, or starting that business, or whatever it is. And that it'll run roughshod over you unless you change your attitude towards it. He says that he talks about it as a writer for writers initially. And it's kind of like, if you're waiting for inspiration to strike, it never will, or it won't last, and you won't get what you want done. He says that's being an amateur. What you want to do is turn pro. He says pros sit down every day and they do the work, whether it's any good or not. And eventually the good stuff will come. But it's all about the attitude that you bring to it. So when I started doing these ceremonies in that summer of 2017, within a few weeks, I started to have increasing anxiety that would come on me as soon as I started up. And when I was writing up my reports afterwards, I referred to it as resistance. It felt, because I was used to think I had tried to be a writer. I had written a bunch of fiction, but I'd also sort of I'd been plagued by writer's block. So I was used to thinking about my writer's block as resistance and trying to overcome it. So when I started to have these feelings in ceremony, it was sort of natural that I transferred that understanding over to it. And it kept getting stronger and stronger as I went, which actually led to the emergence of my anima figure for the first time, where I was in a ceremony, things had gone sideways. I was sliding towards this really a real state of despair. And then all of a sudden, it was like this subsidiary personality, a feminine personality, took over and started controlling my movements. So I'm alone in my apartment dancing to these songs with headphones on. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing like pretend karate and kung fu. I'm doing like making all these weird like Bruce Lee noises and stuff like that. But at the same time, I start talking as her. You know what I mean? And she's like, when she's done, she's like, you know what I mean? Like she acted out almost in this kabuki kind of way, her disdain for her adversaries. And she said something like, "We are Sword Clan and we are sworn allegiant to the true will." Like that just came out spontaneously. And the next week she came back again, except this time she spoke to me, and she spoke to me in the voice of my ex-girlfriend, who at that point was still basically my favorite person in the world. And so what I realized was that this was my anima, and she was using the imaginal construction I had of my memories of this person who had been so important to me to communicate to me directly. And then we started talking back and forth. She became this very real and reliable presence in ceremony. So fast forward a little bit, right? I keep going with this stuff. The resistance I get starts getting worse and worse and worse. And until there are some times where it literally feels like I'm fighting demons. There's a situation that's recounted in both in this book and in my earlier one, Spotify, the Gnostics, where I had brought in these friends, and one of them sort of started misbehaving in this kind of like really irritating way. He kind of turned really infantile, and he started heckling me I'm trying to do this ceremony that I think is sacred, right? And I'm trying to bring these people to an experience of the divine. And he's like, stereo myth, I want some meth and all kinds of shit like that. Even when we got to the most sacred part about the Anne Frank working, he's still like, he was still just talking shit until I had to just tell him to shut the fuck up. Totally had to break character, you know what I mean? But the thing was, I started to feel like I was getting the flu. I got cold sweats. I was drenched in cold sweats, and I was so sick I couldn't even stand upright. And in my mind's eye, what I saw where he was sitting was this gigantic, grossly fat baby, just being like, me, I want to get high. I want to get high. I want to get high. And that was what was coming through him. He was radiating that energy into the room, and it was directly affecting me, right? And so now, obviously, this is a complex story, but I have to explain it. But now I have to tell it as a parallel story that with the ayahuasca group that I've been working with, one of the things that they did was they cleared bad energy off of people, or what they called shaitana, right? And there was this other experience that I had actually the first time I tried to bring other people into this ceremonial thing, and I had rented this for 24 hours. I'd rented this space in Seattle and built and did this thing. And when I went to see the ayahuasca group next, he cleared me off. And then the week after that, he was furious with me because he had gotten really sick. He said he had cleaned a bunch of shaitana off me and there had been blowback onto him and he had gotten really ill from it. And that was when I started realizing that there might be some kind of like objective reality to this stuff, right? And so now to skip ahead a little bit, a couple years, when I was doing my ceremonies, I started getting these visions of bugs. And the way I always describe it is you're the same age. You'll remember overhead projectors.
Oh, yeah.
So there, when we were in classrooms, when we were kids, we would have these machines that would project an image on the wall. And the way they did it, there was a transparent overlay and you would put it on the box and the light would shine through it and it would go through a lens and project on the wall. And so if you can picture a clear plastic sheet and then on it is silhouette of mice, right? Silhouettes of mice. And now imagine them scampering around through an invisible maze, right? Now imagine your eyes are closed and you're looking at the normal fractals and stuff you would see while you're tripping. But overlaid on that, you see silhouettes of mice scampering over it. And this happened to me dozens of times. And it happened, and it wasn't just mice, it was like spiders and ants and rats and all kinds of things. And every time that started happening, I knew I was in for a bad time because that meant that the real, like these waves of terror and frustration and fear and doubt would be breaking upon me soon. And things could go really bad when you're on a really, really high dose of psychedelics and things suddenly go sideways. And I'm not talking about like taking too much because you don't know what you're doing. I'm talking about being a careful practitioner who's been working up to certain dosages and you know exactly what you're doing. You're working within a ceremonial context that provides guide rails for what you're doing. And you're trying to achieve certain very clear emotional states. And yet you were utterly unable to get there because you can feel something oppositional in consciousness standing in your way that's basically inflicting emotion on you. And it gets to the point where you're clear-headed about what's happening, but from the neck down, your body is locked in panic. And that's such an interesting experience to have, and in the Devil, there's this one particular episode where I have a transcription of a description I give in real time of what one of these attacks was like. And I alternate between talking myself through it and describing for the camera, like what was happening. And demonology ends up being as a lapsed Catholic, that was the place where I went to try to understand what was happening. Mm-hmm. Now, after a couple years of this, and I'm talking, like I said, this happened dozens of times, I finally had enough. And I was like, I think maybe I need to go back and see those ayahuasqueros and maybe they can help me because it really was getting like desperately bad. And the guy that I normally was going to work with wasn't at the last minute, he wasn't available. So somebody else was going to take over. And this guy wanted to interview everybody before we came up and sat with him. So I was talking with him on the phone. His name is Robert. And I was explaining to him why I was coming up and what I had been seeing. And he goes, telling him about the mice and the rats and the ants and stuff. And he goes, oh yeah, that's Capo Carabo. And I said, what? And he said, the vermin, that's Capo Carabo. That's a Shipibo term. Like we see that all the time. And I just could not believe it. Like Matt had told me that he would see Shaitana as black caterpillars and stuff like that, or bats, right? I never really connected those two things because I'm not an ayahuasquero. I wasn't operating within the ayahuasca
Mm-hmm.
space. And yet, nevertheless, I was dealing with with the same reality. The stuff that Matt had been so furious with me for tracking into his Maloka, basically, I was dealing with on my own and had to find my own way to deal with because I wasn't operating in the ayahuasca space. In fact, when I called this guy that I knew better and was like, "What do I do?" He really didn't have anything to say except go down to the jungle and do some diets. And I was like, Christ, that's no help for me at all. It really wasn't. But eventually the way that I found to deal with it, and this marked a major turning point in my development, was I actually saw through their eyes during one experience. I was
Mm-hmm.
doing a ceremony and all of a sudden I saw myself, what I saw was something that looked a lot like a hospital hallway, just this white sterile space. And I was right on the floor and I was absolutely terrified. And I realized I was a mouse. And all I wanted in the world was to get someplace safe because where I was right now was not safe. And that was I didn't have any thoughts or anything, just this impulse, find someplace safe. And I realized that I was seeing that if symbolically, I was seeing through the eyes of one of these Tapokirbo that I was seeing, and that all of them were sentient at some level. They were they were sparks of the divine as well. And that the reason they were swarming to me is because they could feel the energy of the goddess coming off of me. They felt that warmth and that love, and they just wanted to be close to her. So that what that meant was I had to become the queen of the Our Lady of Vermin and gather them to me and love them and blow their circuits with just allow that superconduct that love into them and watch them go turn white and go and go out. And that totally worked. It was the most incredible thing. And then once I realized that I could do that, my attitude towards them changed utterly. And now when they started to show up, I was like, come here, children. And then I would just love them right out of existence. But I realized that was the gig, was to open yourself up to that. And the way that you know that it's happening is because your attitude totally changes. Your feeling utterly changes. Instead of feeling, this terrible tension in your emotional plexus, you felt total relaxation and just this wonderful sense of warmth and love and care and sympathy. God, it was so good. And continues to be so good, but that was the gig. And so learning to survive all that was what this book was about. And basically the hero's journey that I went through was to get through all that stuff. And then eventually learned that it's not enough just to survive it. You have to learn how to relax under it, because that's when, under the stress of it, because that's when you truly start trusting in the divine. And that's what opens up that ego self access and allows that energy to start flowing down from the archetypal self. There. Hope I didn't talk too much.
That was great. Thank you. It makes me think about, I just did this talk earlier this week on therapy as ecstatic experience. And, I have a bone to pick with a lot of therapists, because many therapists are interested in getting you back into some earlier, more obedient stage of existence. And so it's like, get along to go along and play along with the kind of social game of our very sick social game of consumerism and production. And let's like not let you shatter, let's fix you. You're broken. Let's fix you. And so I'm really inspired by what you're saying, because you're essentially doing that. You're allowing for the shatter to happen and having a place to be able to shatter, and then finding ways for redemption and resurrection to happen, which is really what the whole myth is about in the first place. Yet we consistently, I like this about you a lot, that part of you that's trained in martial arts, it's certainly trained in CrossFit, and you push yourself physically, and gone back to an earlier form of education that wasn't simply just learn how to, what year did such and such happen, but a true form of critical thinking and being in a physical body. And it's a well-rounded education. And now you're giving it voice in literary form, which, we used to do all the time. If you were elite and you could read and write, basically.
Right. Yeah. You tell a story, and then other people can absorb that story, and that will end up conditioning their own experiences. It's knowing that somebody else made it through this has to be, I'm hoping, will inspire other people. It's what this does, among other things, is it puts you through the hero's journey in first person. We're used to talking about the hero's journey as something we experience vicariously by identifying with characters in books and movies and stuff like that. But when you lay yourself on the line in these situations, you're doing it. You really are. The risk is real, but so is the reward. You know, and the boons that you can return with are pretty considerable. You know, at this point, I've developed a new way to work with psychedelics, a new approach to religion. You know what I mean? A systematic training methodology for something that seems to be resulting in a state called functional enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
All these things are gifts that I've brought back from these harrowing experiences that I had.
Go there. Functional enlightenment. What is that?
The traditional idea of enlightenment that's expressed in both Hinduism and Buddhism to a large extent involves the dissolution of the individual self into an all. Whether that's, in Hinduism, it's moksha is the recognition of Atman is Brahman, right? And then in Buddhism, it's the recognition that everything is codependently arising, and so ultimately everything is emptiness. There is no essential self, and that's what gives you the freedom, right? And what we're seeing these days, it irritates me on a level that makes me realize that there's definitely shadow stuff in here. Is the rampant it's the neo-Advaita, the non-dualist stuff that's everywhere and so shallow.
Yeah.
Because it downplays the amount of work that's necessary to truly make this transformation of consciousness, right? But more than anything else, what bothers me is the affect these people display when they're talking about their experiences, because they're just so sort of vague and not really articulate, and asking me to sit and watch them stare blankly into the camera for 30 seconds, a minute, while they're kind of groping for the next thing to say. And I realized there had to be a different way. And then I realized that there is. And what is apparently emerging. So this is at, John, one thing I would definitely want to talk to you about, it's at some point before you're keeping track of the time, I imagine, right? Is I definitely want to have a little bit of time to talk about this idea of this realization as being like a end state of the individuation process. Okay.
So let's map that out for a second, because I want to certainly talk about functional enlightenment. I want to go back to what you talked about with the work that it takes. Certainly that's evident by what we're talking about, but I want to allow for that to populate a bit. And then we can go into Christ 2.0. We can get into that approach. so let's go there. Functional enlightenment. Anything else to say on that?
Oh yeah. So functional enlightenment basically takes Maslowian self-actualization and Jungian individuation and turns them into soteriological events. And so enlightenment in general is a penetrating insight into the nature of reality that improves your life and the lives of the people around you, right? And like I said, in the East, that largely is based on dissolution of the ego, right? This makes the realization of your individuality a service to the sacred. Yeah. It preserves an I that relates to a thou, right? And so in one of the things that I say...
Sorry, I just wanted of service to the sacred.
Of service to the sacred, yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's your service to the sacred. It's taking the gifts that you've been given and realizing the name you had before you were born, which is the image that the Holy Ma has of who you are going to be at the end of time. And one of the I honestly think I'm going to end up being one of the more important theologians of the 21st century, because I've come up with an entirely new theology that casts your relationship with the divine as a romantic comedy. It's based on this idea of Pygmalion in reverse, where the goddess is the sculptor and you are the image you are the statue that she's fallen in love with, right? Yeah. And she has this image of who you are going to be, and your ultimate destination, John, is to become one half of the divine dyad, right? But she's got 999 billion other ones too. You know what I mean? That's how she is. Because she's got enough for all of us.
That's right.
And so that's the thing that you're trying to do. So that is entirely a matter of you figuring out who you want to be. That's the refrain that echoes all throughout in Entheogenic Fitness Training. Who do you want to be? You consider that while you're at peace, but you also consider that's a very important question to ask yourself when you're under stress. Is in this moment of stress, who do I want to be? How do I want to conduct myself? And then you do that. And the more that you do that, the more your entheogenic fitness improves. Mm-hmm. So that's what it's all about. So it's in that sense, it's not antithetical to the Eastern ideas of enlightenment. That's totally valid within that context. but it's simply not the only way to approach it anymore. When you engage with when you're in that constant state of relationship with the archetype of the self, it floods your psyche with numinous energy. And under normal, for the untrained person, that would result in pathological inflation.
Yeah.
But what you do in the context of entheogenic fitness training is you build up this super hypertrophied ego structure, and then you disidentify with it. And then it basically works as a containment system for that energy. So you're literally standing there in line. I can sit there, I can probably do it right now. Fuck. All I have to do, all I have to do, and I have to bring it back down a little bit. All I have to do is think about the fact that there's a 1 Planck length cube of the divine at the very center of my energetic structure, right? The Planck unit is the very, very smallest unit of measurement. And so just to give you an idea of how small it is, that the distance from the center of me to where that spark is to the outside of my skin is further than the distance from us to the edge of the universe. That's how small the Planck length thing is, right? But as soon as I just think about it for a second, bam, I get inflated. But I contain it. And then, so part of being functionally enlightened is that you then can channel that energy through the lens of whichever archetype is going to promote eudaimonia, the highest good in a given situation. And the way that you decide your own particular style of applying that energy is your existential aesthetic. That defines who you are and who you want to be. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's the context of all this training and everything, is you assemble a range of archetypes that you know how to inhabit. Archetypes are just, they're roles. They're like acting roles. And there's actually an exercise that I have in EFT called thespianizing, where you spend all this time imagining you're the very best version of yourself. And then you go out and you play that in the world. You play that role. And then you get into situations, and then you try to remember, I'm going to be my best self in this situation. How does my best self act? And it's kind of an exercise of, instead of asking, what would Jesus do? You ask yourself, what would I as Jesus do? You know what I mean? What's going to be your expression of that Christos energy, which is, the self-sacrificing aspect of the divine child.
Well, go there for a second, because the Christic element.
Well, and this is where it ties into Jung, right? And this is where our understanding of what individuation means has to change now in the wake of the publication of the Red Book and Kingsley's Catafalque, and now the way we have to take seriously Richard Knoll's critical biographies, the Jung Cult and the Aryan Christ, which drew on Jung's private correspondence. And we have to admit that the ultimate goal of individuation for Jung and for anybody now at this point is the experience of auto-deification, and then the disambiguation of your ego from that energy. That's where it goes. That is the ultimate. That is the sort of like, that's where human beings can go. And Jung talks about, and I quote him in The Devil You Know, about this idea of this plurimatic process where the Christ energy is incarnating throughout history. And he expects that Christ was the first one, and that ultimately there'll be millions of youngers and brothers and sisters of his, right? And then there's another quote where he says something like, you should all become Christs.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is what this is all about. He says, no one can be spared the way of Christ, since this way leads to what is to come. You should all become Christs. And I read that after I had already stated in the First Church of David Bowie Shamanic Cabaret, where the stated goal of Phonomancer is the creation of 10 billion Christs. Right? It's a mass enlightenment strategy, in the sense that it's a working prototype of a new way to religion that delivers gnosis, that's grounded in communitas, that's grounded in community, right? And so what I wanted to read was this. So the figure of Phonomancer, the shamanic superhero, is sort of the sort of like the comic book version of this idea, right? He is somebody who has a supreme level of entheogenic fitness, which means that he is functionally enlightened, and that's how he participates in the world, right? And so I'll just read you this section. He says, Phonomancer is and what this ties into is Jung's constant refrain of an inner sun. He says the mystics experience their love, their libido as an inner sun. And that was, so this thing only became apparent to me as I was writing this book. And at the very end, when I was doing this part 3, where I was looking at all these visionary experiences that I had had and saw that there were motifs that developed across it. And one of them was the appearance of this white light that appeared in multiple contexts, often as an inner sun. And there was one in particular image where I became a Dyson sphere. And a Dyson sphere, for those of you who don't know, is a science fictional idea. It's a mega structure where an alien, like a type 4 alien civilization could basically deconstruct a planet and then use it to construct a sphere around a star to totally absorb all of its energy. That's a Dyson sphere. And so in a vision, I saw this inner star that I had, and I became a Dyson sphere around it. And I was able to absorb as much energy from the goddess as I could, right? And so that's what informs this idea here. It says, Phonomancer is an anthropomorphic star. His black vibranium supersuit gives human form to the infinite ocean of churning white light that is the goddess. The delta, like a triangle, on his chest is a window to what's within, and maybe that energy only fully manifests when a second delta emerges and turns inverted. Together, the superimposed triangles symbolize the hieros gamos of anima, or sacred marriage, of anima and ego, soul and spirit, a fractal of the reunion of Ma and Pa, the divine feminine, divine masculine. Then it's a syzygic reactor that allows him to superconduct self into the world with a capital S. My Phonomancer suit is the entheogenic fitness I developed by dealing with resistance, or more accurately, it is my spirit after being forged by God, who used resistance as a hammer and the activated prophet archetype as an anvil. The process was painful, but now my consciousness, desire, and will are ready for me to achieve my destiny. Shifting the locus of one's identity from ego to self unleashes overwhelming energy. It can cause pathological ego inflation in someone unprepared for it, or enthusiasm in ceremony. That's one of those possession experiences I was talking about. Someday that might be my everyday condition, but due to this training, you'll never be able to tell, not beyond the ease and delight I radiate as I live powered by an internal sun. The ultimate purpose of the full armor of God is not withstanding attack. It's holding space for ecstasy. And so that was a year and a half ago. And so in the year and a half since then, I started writing this book of what I called speculative soteriology, right? And so science fiction is often called speculative fiction, right? It's like you're making something up. And soteriology is the study of the mechanics of salvation. And so I was in this liminal space where I was writing about something that hadn't really happened, but I thought maybe could. And then, much to my surprise, again, hypersigilizing, it seems to be happening more and more. I'm not done yet. I seem to be about like halfway through the process. There's this, what ends up happening is that you hit this, what I call the ontological condom, which is basically it's your basic final inability to believe that there's anything more to the really know in your bones that there's more to life than mundane reality. And what I think it is at the most basic level is your identification with your ego body, right? Because your ego body reacts to your spirit's attempts to disidentify with it as dying, and it objects to that with everything that it's got. And what you're really trying to do by trying to transcend that boundary is let go of the gunwale of the boat and walk on water, right? Because that's what people don't really understand is the point of that story of Jesus and Peter, right? So for those of you who don't know, in the gospel, there's a story where the disciples all go out in a boat on a lake and there's this terrible storm and they're afraid they're going to drown. And then the storm comes and they look out and there's Jesus walking across the water to them. And Jesus beckons to them, and Peter, in his excitement, leaps out of the boat and starts walking across the water to Jesus. And he realizes what he's doing, and then he starts to sink, and he's like, Lord, help me, help me. And Jesus picks him up and puts him back in the boat, right? So the point is not that Jesus was walking on the water, it's that Peter was walking on the water. And if he had just maintained faith in what he was doing, he could have crossed that distance and then shaken hands with Christ as an equal, as another Christ. And that's a metaphor for this letting go of mundane reality and being willing to absolutely accept that this is everything that you've been experiencing is for real. And this is obviously much easier to achieve when other people around you believe it's possible. I have discovered it's a difficult thing to do when you're the only person in the universe who believes that this is real. Right? Because nobody actually thinks that you can really do this, right? And so this is the thing that I wanted to say to you, John, and kind of get your take on this, right? As far as I can tell in my review of the literature, there has not yet to this date been a published accounting of somebody going to this level of the individuation process. Kingsley hints at it, but he doesn't actually say that he has done it. He drops these hints that maybe it's happened to him. Some of the things that he says definitely seems like he's speaking from a first person, subjective experience. But I think that might make The Devil You Know actually a really important book. Even though it's written by a guy who's a nobody who lives in the middle of nowhere, I'm pretty sure that now it's my job to actually basically demand that people read it and take it seriously, because I did the work. Like it is really carefully documented, all those experiences, and you can see when you look at it, especially the way that I lay it out in part 3 of the book, you can go back and read because I put codes in for all the different visionary things, and you can see how the motif evolves, and you can see that it really does seem to be pointing towards something, towards some final end state, which I believe now is, in in EFT, I call this stage crucifignition, right? That's my story, the long process of this and grueling and arduous process of disidentifying from the ego body. And it moves towards this state called ignition. And ignition is an endogenous enthusiasm. It's when you are able to achieve these states, you're able to move into belief space, right? You are totally identified with God without any external help, just through your own belief. And that is, and I think what's going to happen at that point is basically the world will disappear in a blaze of white for a little bit, and then I'll come back down to my normal level, and then I'll finally achieved it, and I will be past this sort of like this agonizing place of like kind of being there but not really there. And like this has been really demanding. Like I've made a lot of sacrifices for this. I've lost all my friends. I haven't had a girlfriend in like 10 years. I've been unemployed for 2 years. I'm living on savings. Like I've given this everything, and I still don't really know if it's all for real, right? I'm proceeding on pure belief and hoping that at some point somebody will be willing to respond to this and be like, holy shit, I actually think what you think is happening, and now we should figure out what that means and how we can expedite this, because you're only as much of yourself as other people can allow you to be, right? And as far as I've come so far, that's nothing compared to what I could do if I had like some subject matter experts working with me on this stuff and basically red teaming me, like all the work, the theology that I've done, the mythos that I've done, the claims that I'm making. More than anything else, what I want to do is do my ceremony in a lab. I'm not with all the costumes and everything. I just want to sit down with the discotheque at the end of the universe, put myself in take like 25 milligrams of THC and then like top that off of edibles, like 5 edibles, and top that off with a big hit off a pre-roll joint too, and then talk to you just the way I'm talking to you right now, with absolutely no loss of like cogitative organization, and then be able to describe in real time the phenomenology of that experience, like to go into trance states and to go into ecstasy and be like, here's what just happened. Here's how I'm doing this. Here's what this means, in order to sort of document this thing and not keep it secret, right? To make it open source so that anybody can try it for themselves if they want, and then help me make it better.
This is first of all, it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy conversing with you. Is I don't know that this kind of experiential work is well received in, as we were saying earlier, in the academy.
No.
And I think that, my initial thought is that there's a really big difference between esoteric practice and the fruits of that work. And I do something Christ said, I think it was Christ said, they will know us by our fruits. And there's a kind of element of what back to this thing, the amount of work that you're talking about. I don't know many people who are going to engage.
True. But if the Buddha was sitting here in front of you now and said, all it's going to take is like meditating 6 to 8 hours a day for the next 10 years, that you would have the same reaction. The fact is, not everybody needs to go this far. Some people, a few people will, but the benefit. So one of the things about entheogenic fitness training is there's 3 components. So entheogenic fitness is defined as your ability to relax under stress or be who you want to be under stress, right? And it has 3 components. It has the component of anti-fragility, it has the component of executive function, and it has the component of gnosis. And any amount of this training that you do will benefit those areas. So it'll make you more anti-fragile, right? It'll give you better executive function. It'll improve your gnosis, not necessarily of the divine, but of your own unconscious processes. And that's something those are things that can benefit anybody in
Totally.
any field, right? And so if you can say like, look, I can improve your ability, because what you're basically asking people to do, I can put it super simply, right? There's a river. You put on a pair of water wings, you walk out into the river, you face downstream, you pick up your feet, and what happens? Sweeps you away, right? It sweeps you away. That's the energy of the medicine. Okay. When you get super high, right? If you can, it'll just sweep you away. In fact, that's one of the things I want to talk about is my extremely punk attitude towards being sick to death of everybody looking only backwards as opposed to applying our creativity and ingenuity towards new things, right? But historically, that is the advice. Turn off your mind and relax and float downstream. However, there is another way, which is where you walk into the river, you face upstream, you pick up your feet, and then you start swimming, right? And you swim as hard as you need to be exactly where you want to be. And eventually you get tired, right? And then if you want, you can let go and it'll sweep you away. But when you come out and you rest, you're going to experience a positive adaptation. You're going to be stronger. And in this case, what ends up being stronger is your ability to stay on task despite being distracted by the effects of the medicine. You're effectively gaining a meta level of control over your nervous system. And you can do amazing things where you can get super high and be like, I'm going to be sober. Whoop, and you're sober. And then you're going, I'm going to be super high. Whoa, sober. Whoop. You know what I mean? You can have that level of control. And that directly carries over into other areas of your life. So yeah, I admit that that's going to be difficult for other people to go all the way, but those benefits, I
totally get it. I mean, I think I'm so inspired by what you're saying, because I again, back to the initial part of our conversation, I think you're right. Because what you're talking about Jung, you're talking about Peter Kingsley. I was talking about Greg Shaw. My first thought about who has an active kind of theological orientation that creates this kind of practice. I think Tibetans in the Tibetan practice certainly do. I think there are hidden elements of Greek and Egyptian practices and African indigenous practices and South American indigenous and Native American practices that are very much connected to this animistic world,
Yes.
and I think that we aren't. And like, I didn't grow up in that space. And so I need these kinds of practices. And I need this kind of orientation. I think Jung had it, right? But the crazy thing about Jung is that Jung built a tower in his backyard, essentially, that he didn't have anything above 15th century technology painted on the fucking walls, and went subtly insane and had to remind himself over and over again what his address was and how many kids he's got and what he's doing. Like, this guy had to be in, like, I'm going to rehearse the mundane because my psyche is cracking and I am like shattering. And so then Jung also said something that has an enormous amount of contempt, which is, I'm glad I'm Jung and not a Jungian.
Yeah.
And that, like, so you have a lot of people who are playing around with this particular worldview, but they're not connected to a practice.
Right. Because it's not, nobody's explained it to them in their language and using modern metaphors, which is the other thing that I've managed to do, right? Because I speak pop culture.
Yeah,
but
I love it.
But I also speak Jungian.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I speak depth psychology, right? But importantly, I also speak strength and conditioning training. So I can use all these different things to explain this stuff and make it accessible for people, right? And most importantly, package it in this really hilarious and entertaining.
It's so entertaining
kind of way, right? I mean, it's a shame you never. I always tell people that what I was doing. So I had an entheogem in Portland, right?
Yeah, I remember.
And the way I describe it in the book, it's like, if you can imagine Lin-Manuel Miranda like rapping in a basement wearing a white grandma wig and a red bathrobe to explain his ideas for a musical about Alexander Hamilton. That's basically what I was doing, right? And nobody got it.
Yeah.
Because it was just me by myself. I had these big video screens that were playing these videos and stuff, but mostly what I faced was dumbfounded silence. You know what I mean? Because people just did not understand what it was that they were seeing or what it really offered. But, I've been over and over and over that work. And this is this is interesting. Like, I don't know, hopefully you're writing a book right now, right? Okay. If you need first readers, please ask me. I'd be happy to do it. first readers are not easy to come by.
Yeah.
Nobody reads books anymore, right? So nobody really has time. So I had to rely on AIs as first readers,
Yeah.
which was actually kind of great, because with an AI, you can do something like, here's a chapter from my new book. Please produce a reverse outline of it, which means like go through and find all the important ideas and just say them in declarative sentences so I can see if I'm actually saying what I'm trying to say, right? And you can do things where some of them, like ChatGPT, remembers you, so there's context. Claude doesn't remember you, right? So every time it's like 50 First Dates with Claude. Every time you go back with Claude,
The goldfish.
it doesn't remember you,
Yeah.
right? So you can do something like I can give it the script of the discotheque at the end of the universe and say, please evaluate objectively. And then he'll evaluate it and he is very impressed, because that's a very well constructed entheotrainment. As a ritual, it's extremely well constructed, and it is all that I need at this point. And this is the cross that I'm hanging on, is like, it's all ready to go, right? When you stack up, I'm going to do this thing, because I know I posted this picture the other day.
I saw it.
But this is my output for the last 10 years. God, I can't even put it all up into one thing. Hold on. Here we go. That's right. That's a lot. And it's all original thinking, right? It is primed and ready to go. And if I can find the resources, I'm going to go off like a bomb in this culture. And I'm literally going to teach the world a new way to religion. And I know exactly how I'm going to market it. I'm going to make a movie, and I'm going to market it as the new Rocky Horror Picture Show. And it'll be the thing where people will go, is of the discotheque at the end of the universe, right? And people will take an edible, they'll eat an edible, and they'll go to this thing, and they will have this entheogenic experience in a movie theater.
Yeah, what I like about what you were saying earlier is the preparatory practice.
Yeah,
that's something that's so unique. Well, first, we do need to start closing it out, and I want to. There's a buddy of mine, Rudy Rasmus. He runs a church. He ran a church with his wife Juanita down here, and I went to his church one time, and they serve like 90% homeless folks, unhoused people. And he said it was like a rock show that like at 9 a.m. And he said, you can't bore people.
Yeah.
And I thought, play and entertainment, back to your point, is we learn better, we create more community, we're more connected. And the fact of the matter is, you're dealing with very overwhelming emotional experiences and positioning them in a way that provides a reframe. And I have a chapter in my book actually called The Little Teachers. And that's essentially, I've articulated 30 to 35 different difficult emotional experiences and helped almost give them a character to help us relate with them differently. Because as a therapist, I reject the idea that I need to fix shame. Like that.
Yep.
A lot of people, shame is a portal. And what I really enjoy what you're talking about is that you have a system of engagement, and it's a whole entire dogma, a whole path or process for how to work with these typically very pathologized states. And that's the problem. I mean, is that we pathologize the things that are divine and beckoning us into a broader consciousness. And so I get very inspired by you. And I feel that at the end of our conversations, I feel inspired, and I feel like a return to a practice, and I want to engage, and I want to commune. And so I very much am encouraged by what you're doing in the world and what you're bringing. And if I'm just paying attention to my blood pressure, how excited I am as we're talking, that's a great gauge.
Yeah, man.
But I also really, I adore you. And I think that the work you're doing is exceptional. And, you're putting form to, most people are getting fucked up and having a relationship for a moment with their alternate state of consciousness. And you've created a life out of it. And, I say that all the time, where I'm like, you have to allow for these things to change your life. And where people are like, no, I can't actually change my life. But you've done that. And I admire and respect it. And I feel inspired by you.
Well, hopefully if we put a model out there where people understand that you can do that and you can relate to these things in a new way. And that's really where the idea of movies becomes so helpful, because you can show people doing these practices and realizing these benefits. And even though they're actors portraying this, it doesn't matter, because you're implanting the idea in the consciousness of the public. Yeah. And then that will in turn condition their experiences, just the way the sacred stories of the past did.
Absolutely.
Right? And those experiences will have most importantly, will overcome the possible psychedelic Tower of Babel, where everybody's just siloed in their own individual things, because ultimately the really important thing is getting together with other people.
Yeah.
And that's the benefit of this stuff is like, if this was to catch on where you get together with other people to participate in these sort of like little jukebox musicals, that means spending a little bit of time together with people, working on your singing. You work on some dance steps and stuff together. It's just the best thing ever. It's making friends as an adult is so difficult. But here's like a way that doesn't involve alcohol, you know what I mean, on a regular basis. And it makes you more of the person that you would like to be. You know, you get to imagine who you want to be and then become that person alongside other people who are doing the same thing.
I feel so inspired by your work, Sean. Thank you.
You're so kind to say that. Thank you.
Well, I am. It's so genuine. Like I could talk to you for 10 hours and like it's a very enriching experience. I really appreciate the process you've put words to, and you can articulate this so well. And yeah, I could do this for a long time.
Well, thank you. And, you know, as you know, like I've been looking forward to this for a long time, because again, as I told you before we started talking, you're the only person I know of who could really have understood this book, because not only are you a Jungian, but you read Catafalca. In fact, you turned me on to Catafalca, and you have experience with psychedelics, and you're a former professional musician. So you have the reference for all these things where other people simply don't yet.
I love it.
So I know I got a little like excited and garrulous there, and I appreciate you being patient with me. But it was so fun, man. That 2 hours went by like that.
I had a blast with you, and I look forward to, again, I mean, you're a regular on this show, so I look forward to more. And I will, when it comes to my book, I will take you up on that in some way. I've got a few more months, and I would love to have your input on the text.
I would be honored. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thanks for being here, Sean.
Thank you.
Okay, hang on. Give me a sec.
Persuade your